Sometimes the dreams we chase the hardest are the ones that change our lives forever. When you've lost everything that mattered and find yourself starting over at 43, even a $5 cabin in the middle of nowhere feels like hope. Nora Blackwood had saved every penny to buy her freedom in the Colorado mountains. She hiked for hours through dense forest, carrying everything she owned on her back. The old cabin looked perfect, weathered but sturdy, surrounded by towering pines. She climbed the creaking porch steps and reached for the door handle. That's when she heard the growl. Through the gap in the door, golden eyes stared back at her. A mountain lion had made this place its home. But as terrifying as that moment was, Nora had no idea that this beautiful predator was guarding something far more dangerous than she could imagine. Why would a wild animal refuse to leave a cabin that clearly held deadly secrets? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. Nora Blackwood stood frozen on that weathered porch, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The golden eyes watching her through the gap in the door held no malice, only a calm intelligence that seemed to assess her as carefully as she was assessing it. She'd encountered mountain lions before, during her 15 years as a park ranger, but never like this. Never when she was the intruder in their territory. The photograph in her backpack seemed to burn against her spine, a family portrait she couldn't bring herself to look at, but couldn't bear to leave behind. David's gentle smile, captured forever at age 45, and Emma's bright laugh frozen at 17. 2 years had passed since the accident, since the drunk driver took them both on a rainy Tuesday evening while she was working late at the ranger station. 2 years of sleepless nights, of empty rooms that echoed with memories, of a world that felt too loud and too empty all at once. The $5 deed had arrived in her mailbox like a miracle. Samuel Hartwell, a name she didn't recognize, had somehow known she needed an escape. The legal documents were legitimate, processed through a Denver law firm that specialized in rural property transfers. When she'd called to verify, the lawyer had been brief but professional. Mr. Hartwell specifically requested that if anything happened to him, this property should be offered to someone who would appreciate its unique qualities. You fit his criteria perfectly, Ms. Blackwood. She'd sold everything else. The suburban house with its manicured lawn and painful memories. David's woodworking tools that still smelled of cedar and pine. Emma's room, left untouched for 18 months until she finally found the strength to pack away the college acceptance letters and prom dress. The life insurance money would last her years if she lived simply, and simple was all she wanted now. The Colorado wilderness had always been her sanctuary, even as a child growing up in Denver. Her grandfather had taught her to read animal tracks, in creek mud, to identify edible plants, to move through forest without disturbing the natural rhythms of the wild. Those skills had served her well as a ranger, but now they would determine whether she survived whatever was waiting behind that cabin door. The mountains surrounding her property rose nearly 10,000 feet, its peak dusted with early October snow. Ponderosa pines climbed the slopes like ancient guardians, their red bark warm in the afternoon sun. She could hear the whisper of wind through their needles, the distant call of a red-tailed hawk, the soft babble of a creek she'd crossed. A mile back, this was the silence she craved. Not the horrible quiet of her empty house, but the living hush of a world that continued its ancient dance without human interference. Her backpack held everything she owned now, camping gear that had seen her through countless backcountry expeditions, clothes chosen for durability over style, emergency supplies that could keep her alive for weeks if necessary. The heaviest item was her grandfather's old field guide to Rocky Mountain flora and fauna, its pages soft with decades of use. She'd learned survival from those pages before she'd learned it from any ranger training manual. The mountain lion shifted behind the door, and she caught a glimpse of tawny fur, powerful shoulders. Female, she realized. The head shape and size told her that much. This wasn't a young Tom looking for territory or an old male past his prime. This was a mature female, which meant the protective behavior made sense. Mountain lions were solitary, except when raising cubs, and females with young were among the most dangerous predators in North America. But something in those golden eyes didn't speak of aggression. Caution, yes. Wariness, certainly, but not the wild rage she'd expect from a threatened predator. The cat seemed almost patient, as if she were waiting for Nora to make the next move. The cabin itself told a story of careful abandonment. The windows were intact, the roof solid despite its weathered appearance. Someone had taken care of this place recently. The porch boards were sound under her feet, and she could see where repairs had been made to the foundation stones. The front door hung slightly ajar, not from damage, but as if someone had left in a hurry and hadn't bothered to secure it properly. Through the gap, she could see glimpses of the interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth clean but stained with recent use. Bookshelves lined another wall, their volumes still neatly arranged. This wasn't the chaos of an abandoned property left to the elements. This was the ordered quiet of a home whose owner had simply disappeared. The late afternoon sun slanted through the pines, casting everything in golden light that reminded her of Emma's hair. Her daughter had inherited David's steady temperament, but Nora's love of the outdoors. They'd hiked these same mountains together, Emma chattering about college plans and the boyfriend who'd finally worked up the courage to ask her to prom. Plans that would never unfold. Dreams that had died with her on a wet road 2 Octobers ago, a stick cracked somewhere in the forest behind her, and both she and the mountain lion turned toward the sound. Just a squirrel, probably, or a branch settling in the cooling air. But the cat's reaction told her something important. It was protecting this place from more than just her unexpected arrival. The tension in its posture suggested it had been on guard for some time. Nora slowly lowered her backpack to the porch, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. The mountain lion watched but didn't retreat. She'd read somewhere that big cats could sense fear and aggression, that staying calm was often the difference between a peaceful encounter and a deadly one. Right now, calm was about all she had left to offer. "Easy, girl," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you or yours." The response surprised her. Instead of a warning growl or defensive posture, the mountain lion cocked its head slightly, as if actually listening. Nora had spent enough time in the wilderness to know that wild animals didn't typically respond to human speech this way. This cat had been around people before, long enough to lose some of its instinctive fear. The property deed in her jacket pocket felt suddenly heavy. $5 for acres of pristine mountain wilderness, complete with a cabin that someone had maintained and then abandoned. Samuel Hartwell, whoever he was, had either been desperate to sell or had reasons for wanting the property in specific hands. The more she thought about it, the more questions arose. The shadows were lengthening, and she could already feel the mountain chill that would arrive with sunset. She had camping gear, but spending the night exposed on this porch with a protective mountain lion just inside wasn't her idea of a peaceful evening. She needed shelter, and the cabin was clearly her best option. The question was how to negotiate with a 120-pound predator that had apparently claimed squatters' rights. "We're going to have to work something out," she told the watchful eyes behind the door. "This is my place now, but I'm not looking to evict you without cause. There's got to be a reason you're here." As if in response, she heard a sound from deeper in the cabin. Not a growl or the pad of paws, but something else, a softer noise, almost like crying. Her heart clenched. Cubs. The mountain lion wasn't just protecting territory, she was protecting her young. The pieces began falling into place. A female with cubs would claim the safest, most secure den she could find. The cabin offered shelter from weather and other predators, and if it had been abandoned for months, it would have seemed like perfect real estate from a mountain lion's perspective. But cubs meant the cat couldn't simply be frightened away. She would fight to the death before abandoning her young. Nora understood that kind of protective instinct. She'd felt it herself, fierce and uncompromising during Emma's childhood. The lengths a mother would go to protect her child knew no bounds, whether the mother walked on 2 legs or 4. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Soon it would be dark, and the mountain would belong to predators far more dangerous than the careful, intelligent cat watching her from the cabin. She needed to make a decision, and standing on this porch in the growing cold wasn't going to solve anything. "All right," she said softly to the mountain. "Lion, let's see if we can be neighbors instead of enemies." Dawn came with the sharp clarity that only existed above 9,000 feet, where the air was thin enough to make every color vivid and every sound crisp. Nora had spent the night in her sleeping bag on the far end of the porch, close enough to the cabin's warmth, but far enough from the door to avoid threatening the mountain lion inside. She'd slept fitfully, waking every hour to the sounds of the forest settling around her. The mountain lion had been quiet through the night, but she'd heard movement. The soft pad of paws on wooden floors, the creak of boards under considerable weight. Once, around midnight, she'd caught the golden gleam of eyes at a window, watching her with that same patient intelligence. They were learning to coexist, predator and human, both protective of what they'd claimed. The cold had seeped through her sleeping bag despite its rating, and her first priority was getting warm. She could see her breath in the morning air, and frost glittered on the pine needles like scattered diamonds. Winter came early at this elevation, and she'd need better shelter soon. That's when she noticed something that hadn't been visible in yesterday's failing light. The porch wrapped around the cabin's eastern side, and beneath the far corner, partially hidden by overgrown mountain laurel, something wooden protruded from the foundation stones. Nora approached carefully, aware that the mountain lion was probably watching her every move. The wooden object was a box, hand-carved from what looked like cedar, its surface weathered but intact. It had been deliberately hidden, wedged between foundation stones where only someone crawling under the porch would find it. Her heart clenched as she pulled it free. David had been a master woodworker, and this box showed the same attention to detail she remembered from his hands. The joints were perfect, the surface smooth despite years of weather exposure. Whoever had made this had loved the craft as much as her husband had. The box was heavier than she'd expected, and something rattled inside when she moved it. A simple latch held it closed, but the wood had swollen with moisture, and she had to work at it for several minutes before it gave way. When it finally opened, her breath caught. Maps, dozens of them, hand-drawn and professionally printed, showing the mountain in detail she'd never seen. Topographical surveys, marked with elevation changes down to the foot. Geological assessments that meant nothing to her but were clearly important to someone. And beneath them, folded sheets of paper covered in handwriting. The first note was dated 3 months ago, written in a careful hand that spoke of education and precision. They know about the surveys now. Denver group asking too many questions. Time is running out. Another from 2 months ago, confirmed deposits are everything we suspected. Conservative estimate puts value at 40 million, possibly much more. Cannot let them take this land. And then, dated just 6 weeks ago, sale arranged. Found the perfect person. Park ranger, widowed, needs isolation. She'll protect what we found. She'll know what to do. Nora's hands shook as she read the words again. Samuel Hartwell hadn't sold her this property by accident. He'd chosen her, specifically researched her background, known about David and Emma's deaths. But why? What had he found here that was worth $40 million? The geological maps were covered in notations she didn't understand, but certain symbols appeared repeatedly throughout the mountain. Mining claims, she realized. Someone had done extensive mineral surveys of this entire area. The cabin sat at the center of what appeared to be a significant find. A sound from inside the cabin made her look up. The mountain lion was at the window again, but this time her attention wasn't on Nora. The cat was looking past her, toward the tree line, ears forward and alert. Every line of her body spoke of tension. Nora turned to follow the cat's gaze and felt ice form in her stomach. Tire tracks, fresh ones, leading up the mountain road she'd hiked yesterday. Someone with a four-wheel drive vehicle had been here recently, and from the depth of the tracks, they'd been carrying something heavy. She stuffed the maps and notes back into the wooden box, her mind racing. The mountain lion's protective behavior suddenly made more sense. If people had been coming here, exploring the property, looking for whatever Samuel Hartwell had found, then the cat's wariness wasn't just about protecting cubs. It was about protecting territory from a threat that had already proven dangerous. The tire tracks were less than 2 days old, probably made while she was hiking up from the main road. Someone had been here while she was approaching, which meant they knew about the property transfer. They might even know about her. A distant sound made both her and the mountain lion freeze. Engines. Still far away, but growing closer. Multiple vehicles, from the sound of it, working their way up the rough mountain road that was barely more than a jeep trail. Nora grabbed the wooden box and her backpack, looking around desperately for cover. The cabin was her only real option. But that meant somehow negotiating with a protective mountain lion who was already on high alert. The approaching vehicles had made the decision for both of them. Whatever threat was coming up, that mountain was bigger than their territorial dispute. She moved to the cabin door, which still hung slightly ajar, and spoke softly. "They're coming." "Back, aren't they? That's why you won't leave." The mountain lion appeared in the doorway, no longer hiding. Up close, she was magnificent. Easily 6 feet from nose to tail, her coat a rich, tawny gold, marked with darker patches along her legs and face. But it was her eyes that held Nora's attention. They were calm, intelligent, and completely unafraid. This cat had made her decision about the human on her porch. "I need to get inside," Nora whispered. "We both know what's coming." For a moment that stretched like eternity, woman and predator regarded each other. Then the mountain lion stepped back into the cabin's interior, not retreating but making space. An invitation, or at least permission. Nora didn't hesitate. She slipped through the door and found herself in a space that was both rustic and surprisingly sophisticated. The stone fireplace dominated the main room, but bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on geology, mining, and environmental science. A desk by the window held papers and instruments that looked expensive and technical. The mountain lion padded across the room to a doorway that led to what must be a bedroom. She paused there, looking back at Nora, with an expression that was unmistakably maternal. The cubs were in that room, and she was making sure the human understood the boundaries. "I get it," Nora said quietly. "Your babies are off limits. But we're about to have bigger problems." The sound of engines was closer now, maybe 10 minutes away. From the window, she could see dust rising through the trees where the road wound up the mountainside. At least 3 vehicles, possibly more. She opened Samuel Hartwell's wooden box again, spreading the maps on his desk. If $40 million worth of minerals lay beneath this mountain, then the people coming weren't tourists or lost hunters. They were here for the same thing Samuel had tried to protect, and they probably weren't planning to ask nicely. The mountain lion settled near the bedroom door, positioning herself where she could watch both the approaching threat and protect her young. Her message was clear. She'd tolerate Nora's presence as long as the human proved useful against the greater danger. Looking at the geological surveys, Nora began to understand the scope of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about a $5 cabin or even mineral rights. Someone had been systematically mapping the entire mountain range, identifying deposits that could be worth hundreds of millions if properly extracted. And somehow, Samuel Hartwell had stood in their way. The question was, what had happened to him, and was she about to find out? The sound of vehicles grew louder, echoing off the mountain walls until it seemed to come from every direction at once. Nora pressed herself against the cabin window, trying to get a clear view of the approaching convoy while staying hidden from sight. The mountain lion had moved to the opposite window, her powerful frame tense with alertness. 3 black SUVs wound their way up the final stretch of mountain road, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun like dark mirrors. These weren't casual visitors or lost tourists. Everything about the vehicles screamed money and organization. The kind of people who could afford to send expeditions into remote wilderness areas for reasons that probably weren't entirely legal. "Stay quiet," Nora whispered to the mountain lion, though she suspected the cat understood the danger better than she did. "Let's see what they want." The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, positioned so they blocked any escape route. Down the mountain road, 6 men emerged, all wearing expensive outdoor gear that looked fresh from an REI catalogue. They moved with the careful coordination of people who'd worked together before, spreading out to cover different approaches to the cabin. From her hiding spot, Nora could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the thin mountain air. "Supposed to be empty now. Hartwell's dead. Boss said the transfer was clean. Check the foundation markers again. GPS shows." Her blood chilled. They were talking about Samuel Hartwell in the past tense, with a casualness that suggested his death hadn't been natural, and they clearly expected the cabin to be unoccupied. One of the men, older and clearly in charge, pointed toward the cabin while speaking into a radio. "Base, this is Team 3. We're at the Hartwell site. No signs of current occupation, but we're seeing fresh tracks around the perimeter. Could be wildlife, but we'll do a full sweep before beginning extraction." Extraction. They weren't here to explore or survey, they were here to take something. The mining equipment Samuel's notes had mentioned, or maybe something more valuable. The mountain lion's soft growl drew her attention. The cat was focused on something Nora couldn't see, her ears flat against her head in a way that meant serious danger. Following the animal's gaze, Nora spotted movement at the cabin's rear corner. One of the men was approaching from behind, trying to circle around, while his companions provided distraction from the front. These people were professionals, and they were treating this like a tactical operation. The man at the back of the cabin disappeared from view, and Nora realized he must be looking for another way inside. That's when she heard it, a soft scratching sound from beneath the floor. Someone was exploring the cabin's foundation, possibly looking for the same hidden entrance she was beginning to suspect existed. She needed to understand the cabin's layout better, and fast, moving as quietly as her ranger training had taught her. She began exploring the interior. The main room was larger than it had appeared from outside, with the stone fireplace at one end and Samuel's desk area at the other. A narrow hallway led to the bedroom where the mountain lion's cubs were hidden, and beyond that, a small kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in months. But it was the loose floorboard near the fireplace that caught her attention. Unlike the others, this one moved slightly when she stepped on it, and there were scratches in the wood around its edges, marks that suggested it had been lifted repeatedly. The mountain lion watched her with interest as she knelt beside the board, working her fingers under its edge. It lifted easily, revealing darkness beneath and the musty smell of earth and stone. A cellar or basement, accessible from inside the cabin. The scratching sound from outside was getting closer. Whoever was under there would find this entrance soon enough. Nora grabbed Samuel's geological surveys and the wooden box, then looked at the mountain lion. "I'm going down there. You stay with your cubs. Protect them no matter what." The cat's golden eyes met hers for a moment, and Nora could have sworn she saw understanding there. Then the animal padded back toward the bedroom, positioning herself where she could guard the entrance while keeping her young hidden. The opening beneath the floorboard was larger than it had first appeared, with wooden steps leading down into darkness. Nora lowered herself through, replacing the board above her head as much as possible, while leaving enough gap to hear what happened in the cabin. The cellar was more than she'd expected. A full basement carved from the mountain stone, with support beams that looked professionally installed, and it was filled with equipment that made her breath catch. Mining gear, but not the crude tools she might have expected from a weekend prospector. This was serious equipment: core sample drills, mineral analysis devices, and survey instruments that probably cost more than most people's cars. Everything was clean, organized, and ready for use. But more importantly, the walls were lined with rock samples, each carefully labeled with coordinates and dates. Some showed veins of what looked like gold, while others contained minerals she couldn't identify, but that gleamed with the kind of luster that spoke of serious value. A sudden thud from above made her freeze. Someone had entered the cabin. Told you the place was empty. The voice was muffled by the floorboards, but clear enough to understand. Still needs to be thorough. Boss doesn't want any surprises. What about those tracks outside? Looked fresh to me. Nora pressed herself against the stone wall, hardly daring to breathe. Above her, she could hear boot steps moving across the cabin floor, searching. They were being systematic about it, checking every room. Then she heard something that made her heart stop. A low, warning growl from the mountain lion, followed by a man's sharp curse. Jesus, there's a cat in here, big one. What kind of cat? Mountain lion, female, and she's got cubs. She's between us and the back room. Can you get around her? Not unless you want to explain to the boss why one of us got mauled. This cat's not backing down. Relief flooded through Nora. The mountain lion was doing exactly what she'd hoped, protecting her territory and, inadvertently, buying time. But she could hear the men discussing their options, and it was only a matter of time before they decided. The cat was a problem that needed solving. She had to find out what Samuel Hartwell had discovered down here and why it was worth killing for. The rock samples told part of the story, but there had to be more. Something that explained why a retired geologist would sell his property to a stranger for $5 and then disappear. In the dim light filtering down from the cabin above, she spotted something she'd missed before. A metal filing cabinet tucked into the corner, its surface covered with dust, but its locks intact. Samuel's real secrets weren't in the wooden box on the porch, they were down here, in the heart of the mountain itself. The filing cabinet's locks were simple affairs, designed more to keep the curious out than to withstand serious effort. Nora had learned to pick basic locks during her ranger training. Sometimes you needed to access abandoned buildings or secured areas during search and rescue operations. Her fingers worked quickly in the dim light, guided more by feel than sight. The first drawer contained what she'd expected: detailed geological surveys of the entire mountain range, complete with mineral composition analyses and estimated extraction costs. But the second drawer held something that made her blood run cold. Photographs, dozens of them, showing mining operations that had clearly been conducted in secret. Heavy machinery carved terraces into pristine mountainsides, leaving scars visible. From miles away, streams ran orange with runoff, and entire valleys had been stripped bare of vegetation. The worst part was the dates on the photos. Some were less than 6 months old, but it was the third drawer that revealed the true scope of what Samuel Hartwell had uncovered. Legal documents, correspondence, and what appeared to be financial records showing a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Someone had been conducting illegal mining operations throughout the Colorado Rockies for years, systematically destroying protected wilderness areas and covering their tracks. The company names meant nothing to her, but the dollar amounts were staggering. Hundreds of millions in revenue generated by stripping minerals from federal land without permits or environmental oversight. And based on the correspondence, the operation was expanding. Above her, the argument about the mountain lion continued, but she could hear frustration creeping into the men's voices. The cat wasn't budging, and they clearly hadn't expected to. Deal with wildlife today. Call for tranquilizer gear. Take too long. Boss wants this done. Not going in there with an angry lion. A new voice joined the conversation, older and clearly in authority. What's the holdup? Mountain lion with cubs has claimed the back room. She's not letting us pass. Then work around her. We need those foundation samples today. Foundation samples. Nora looked around the cellar with new understanding. This basement wasn't just storage for Samuel's equipment. It was built directly over whatever mineral deposits he'd discovered. The men upstairs weren't here to search the cabin. They were here to take core samples from beneath it. She pulled more documents from the filing cabinet, her hands shaking as she read. Letters between Samuel and various federal agencies, reporting suspicious activity and requesting investigations. Responses that were polite but non-committal, suggesting his concerns were being buried in bureaucratic red tape. And then, in a folder marked Insurance, she found something that stopped her cold. A letter dated just 2 months ago, addressed to Samuel Hartwell from someone calling themselves the Denver Consortium. Mr. Hartwell, your continued interference in legitimate business operations has become untenable. We've attempted to resolve this matter through proper channels, but your refusal to cooperate leaves us no choice but to pursue alternative solutions. This is your final notice to cease all activities related to our mineral survey projects. The letter was signed with a corporate logo she didn't recognize, but the threat was unmistakable, and Samuel's handwritten response was clipped to the bottom. Property transferred to N. Blackwood as discussed. She has the training and moral character to continue the work. Make sure she gets everything. He'd known they were going to kill him. That's why he'd sold her the property, not to give her a refuge, but to give her a responsibility. He'd made her the guardian of evidence that could expose a criminal conspiracy. A sudden crash from above made her jump. Something heavy had fallen, followed by angry shouts and the distinctive sound of claws on wood. The mountain lion was making her displeasure known. Damn cat knocked over the whole bookshelf. Is she hurt? No, but she's mad as hell now, and those cubs are making noise. Nora smiled grimly. The mountain lion was protecting more than her cubs. She was protecting Samuel's carefully preserved evidence. Every book on those shelves probably contained information the men upstairs didn't want exposed, but her smile faded as she continued reading through the files. The scope of the operation was vast, involving not just mining companies, but government officials, environmental agencies, and even some federal judges. Anyone who tried to stop them had been systematically silenced through legal intimidation, financial ruin, or worse. Samuel's notes tracked at least a dozen people who'd tried to expose the conspiracy over the past 5 years. Environmental activists, government whistleblowers, independent researchers. All had either disappeared, died in suspicious accidents, or been discredited and destroyed professionally. She was now the latest name on a very dangerous list. The sound of power tools starting up above made her look toward the ceiling. They'd apparently decided to work around the mountain lion rather than through her, and from the noise, they were cutting through the cabin floor to access the basement directly. She had minutes, maybe less, before they broke through. The last folder in the cabinet was labeled Emergency Protocols, and inside she found exactly what Samuel had intended her to discover. Contact information for specific federal agents he'd trusted, along with detailed instructions on how to transfer the evidence safely if anything happened to him. But more importantly, she found maps showing escape routes through the mountain. Wilderness. Paths that didn't appear on any official survey, but would allow someone to reach the main highway without using the road the convoy had blocked. Samuel had planned for this contingency. He'd known the property might be compromised, and he'd prepared multiple ways for his successor to survive and fight back. The power tool noise intensified, and dust began filtering down from above. They were cutting a large opening, probably big enough for a man to climb through. She stuffed the most critical documents into her jacket and backpack, then moved toward what appeared to be a second staircase at the far end of the cellar. This one led up to a concealed exit behind the cabin, emerging through what looked like a natural rock outcropping. Samuel had built himself a bolt hole, and now it might save her life, but as she prepared to climb those stairs, she heard something that made her pause. The mountain lion's growl had changed, becoming deeper and more threatening. The cubs were crying, not the soft mewing she'd heard before, but the distressed calls of young animals in danger. The men upstairs had decided the wildlife was expendable. Nora faced a choice that would define everything that followed. She could escape through Samuel's hidden exit, take the evidence to the federal contacts he'd trusted, and let justice run its course through proper channels. It was the safe choice, the rational choice, or she could stay and fight for a mountain lion who'd trusted her enough to share territory, cubs who were about to become orphans, and a piece of wilderness that criminals wanted to destroy. Above her, the power tool broke through the floorboards with a shower of splinters and dust. The choice made itself. The beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness above, followed by the scrape of boots against wood as someone prepared to drop. Into the cellar, Nora pressed herself against the stone wall, heart hammering, as a man's voice echoed from the opening. Jackpot. This is definitely the source. Look at all this equipment. She had seconds before they discovered her. Moving with the silent precision her grandfather had taught her decades ago, she slipped toward the hidden stairs. But as her foot touched the first step, she heard something that froze her blood. A gunshot, sharp, echoing, unmistakable, then silence. In from above. No more growling, no more movement from the cubs. The mountain lion who'd trusted her enough to share territory had paid the price for protecting her family. Rage flooded through Nora, hot and clean and purifying. These men had come to her mountain, threatened her sanctuary, and murdered a creature whose only crime was defending her young. The grief she'd carried for 2 years, the helpless fury at a world that took away everything she loved, crystallized into something harder and infinitely more dangerous. They'd made a mistake. They thought they were dealing with just another obstacle to remove. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who had nothing left to lose. Instead of climbing toward the hidden exit, she moved deeper into the cellar, searching for something specific. Samuel's emergency protocols had mentioned defensive measures, and she was betting a man paranoid enough to build secret escape routes had also prepared for direct confrontation. She found what she was looking for in a steel cabinet hidden behind the mining equipment, enough firepower to outfit a small militia, rifles, ammunition, body armor, and communication equipment that looked military-grade. Samuel Hartwell hadn't just been a concerned geologist. He'd been preparing for war. Above her, multiple voices were now examining the cellar entrance. They'd be down soon, and when they came, she'd be ready. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was fighting for. The final cabinet contained Samuel's personal journal, and she speed-read through months of increasingly desperate entries. March 15th. Confirmed the deposits extend throughout the entire mountain range. Conservative estimates suggest this could be the largest rare earth mineral find in North American history. Environmental impact of extraction would be catastrophic. April 27. Denver Consortium has approached me 3 times now. They're not taking no for an answer, beginning to receive threats through intermediaries. May 8. Federal agencies have been compromised. My reports disappear into bureaucratic black holes. Someone high up is protecting the consortium. June 3rd. They killed Martinez, made it look like a climbing accident, but I know better. I'm next, unless I disappear completely. June 20th. Found the perfect successor. Nora Blackwood has the skills, the motivation, and the moral foundation to continue this fight. Park Service background means she understands environmental protection. Personal losses mean she won't be easily intimidated. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks ago. Transfer complete. If anyone reads this, know that the mountain must be protected at any cost. The minerals beneath it could power renewable energy for decades, but only if extracted responsibly. The consortium plans strip mining that would destroy the entire ecosystem. NB has everything she needs to stop them. Trust her judgment. Samuel had known the mountain lion was there. His earlier entries mentioned tracking a female with cubs, noting how she'd claimed the cabin as a den site. He'd been protecting both the human and animal families who'd made this place home. The sound of boots on the cellar stairs snapped her back to the present. She grabbed a rifle and ammunition, along with Samuel's radio equipment, and moved toward the hidden exit. But as she climbed those concealed stairs, she could hear the men below discovering the evidence she'd left behind. "Boss, you need to see this." Hartwell was documenting everything, photos, financial records, the whole operation. "How much does she know?" The older voice, tight with concern. "Who?" "The woman who bought the property, Nora Blackwood." "If Hartwell pass this information to her, we'll find her. Can't have gone far on foot." But Nora was already moving through the forest with the silent efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years tracking through wilderness. The hidden exit had deposited her behind a natural rock formation 50 yards from the cabin, perfectly. Concealed from the men searching below, she could see the black SUVs through the trees, and more importantly, she could see they'd left them unguarded. These people were confident in their control of the situation, assuming they were dealing with an unprepared civilian who'd stumbled into something beyond her understanding. They were about to learn otherwise. The radio equipment Samuel had left included sophisticated scanning capabilities, and within minutes she'd located their communication frequency. Their chatter revealed more than they probably intended. "Base, this is Team 3. We have the Hartwell evidence, but there's a complication. The property transfer was legitimate, and the new owner may have access to everything." "Understood. What's your recommendation?" "Full cleanup protocol. Make it look like an accident, maybe a wildlife attack or hiking mishap. We can't afford. Loose ends. Approved. Complete your sample collection and sanitize the site." Nora's hands tightened on the rifle. They were planning to murder her and make it look like the mountain lion had killed her, the same mountain lion they'd just shot. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so vicious, but their radio chatter had also revealed something useful. They needed core samples from specific locations around the cabin, which meant they'd be spreading out across the property. Divided, they'd be vulnerable to someone who knew the terrain and had nothing to lose. She moved through the forest like a ghost, using game trails and natural cover to circle around their position. Her ranger training had included tactical courses, preparation for dealing with armed poachers, and drug operations in remote wilderness areas. She'd never expected to use those skills to protect her own property, but life had a way of preparing you for fights you didn't see coming. The first target was their communications array, a sophisticated setup they'd deployed near their vehicles to maintain contact with whoever was coordinating this operation. Nora approached from uphill, using the natural slope to mask her movement. The guard they'd left with the equipment was young, probably new to this kind of work. He was more focused on his smartphone than on watching for threats, confidence bred by the assumption that they were in control. Nora's grandfather had taught her that confidence was a predator's greatest weakness. She disabled their communications with simple efficiency, severing cables and removing key components that would take hours to replace. Then she faded back into the forest before the guard realized what had happened. The next phase required more patience. She needed to separate the men searching around the cabin, isolate them where they couldn't support each other. The mountain terrain was perfect for this. Steep slopes, dense forest, and natural barriers that could turn a coordinated team into scattered individuals. From her concealed position on the ridge above the cabin, she watched them work. Professional. Equipment, systematic approach, but they were operating in her environment now. The mountain had rules they didn't understand, and she was about to become their teacher. The leader was directing operations from near the cabin's front porch, while his men spread out to collect samples from the coordinates on Samuel's surveys. They moved with military precision, but they were thinking like soldiers in hostile territory, rather than hunters in a living ecosystem. The difference was about to become critical. She'd grown up on these mountains, learned their moods and dangers. from someone who'd spent 70 years reading the signs nature provided. Weather patterns, animal behavior, the subtle indicators that meant the difference between life and death at altitude. And right now, the signs were telling her that these men had no idea what they'd walked into. The afternoon clouds building over. The western peaks meant weather was coming, probably snow given the temperature and wind direction. The nervous behavior of the local wildlife suggested predators were moving through the area, displaced by the noise and activity around the cabin. Most importantly, the distant howls echoing off the canyon walls meant the local wolf pack was investigating the disturbance. Wolves were curious about gunshots in their territory, especially when those shots took down animals they'd been tracking. In 30 minutes, maybe less, this mountain was going to become a very dangerous place for anyone who didn't belong here. Nora settled in to wait, rifle ready. Samuel's evidence secure in her backpack. The men below thought they were hunting her, but they'd made a fundamental error in understanding their situation. This wasn't their mountain. It was hers now, bought with $5 and sealed with the blood of a mountain lion who trusted her, and she was about to collect on that debt. The first snowflakes began falling as Nora activated Samuel's hidden radio equipment from her concealed position on the ridge. The device was more sophisticated than anything she'd used during her ranger days, military-grade encryption and satellite uplink capabilities that could reach anywhere in the world. Samuel's emergency contact list included 3 names with federal badges and security clearances, high enough to make her nervous. She started with the first one, Agent Diana Reeves, Environmental Crimes Division, FBI. "This is a secure line," came the immediate response. "Who is this?" "My name is Nora Blackwood. Samuel Hartwell left instructions to contact you if anything happened to him." A pause. "Samuel's dead. Climbing accident 3 weeks ago. How did you get this number?" "He sold me his property before he died, along with everything he'd discovered about the Denver Consortium." The silence stretched so long, she thought the connection had failed. "Then where are you now?" "At the cabin. They're here trying to eliminate the evidence, and me. Stay on this frequency but go dark for 10 minutes. I need to verify some things." The radio went silent, leaving Nora alone with the falling snow and the voices of armed men below discussing how to kill her. Through her binoculars, she could see them becoming more agitated as their equipment malfunctioned and their communications remained down. The wolf howls were closer now, and she could see the team leader checking his watch with increasing frequency. Whatever timeline they were operating under, it was slipping away from them. Movement in the forest caught her attention. Not the men below, but something else. A tawny flash between the trees, low to the ground and moving with purpose. Her heart clenched, then soared. The mountain lion wasn't dead. The gunshot must have missed or perhaps only wounded her, but more importantly, the cat was moving toward the cabin with obvious intent. Mountain lions didn't forget threats to their territory or their young. The radio crackled back to life. "Blackwood, you there?" "Yes. I've been trying to reach Samuel for months. His reports were being buried, but I kept copies. What you're describing matches intelligence we've been developing independently." "They killed him, didn't they?" "Almost certainly. We just couldn't prove it. But if you have his evidence cache, I have everything. Photos, financial records, government correspondence, enough to expose the entire operation. Listen carefully. Help is coming, but it'll take time to reach your location. The Denver Consortium has resources and connections we're still mapping. You need to survive the next few hours." Below, one of the men was approaching the area where Nora had hidden. His systematic search pattern would bring him to her position within minutes. She needed to move, but the radio conversation wasn't finished. "Agent Reeves, they're planning to make my death look like an animal attack. There's a mountain lion here with cubs." "Wait, did you say mountain lion?" "Female with young. They shot at her, but I think she survived. Mountain lions are federally protected in that area. Harming them is a federal crime with mandatory prison time." The approaching searcher was 50 yards away now, working his way up the slope with professional thoroughness. Nora shouldered her pack and began moving higher into the rocks, keeping the radio conversation active. Agent Reeves, I'm going to lose communication soon. These people aren't going to let me walk away from this. Then don't let them dictate the terms. You're on federal land, protecting federal evidence, and they're the ones committing crimes. Make them pay for every step. The radio went silent as Nora switched it off, but the agent's words echoed in her mind. Make them pay for every step. She'd spent 2 years feeling helpless against forces beyond her control. Drunk drivers, medical failures, bureaucratic indifference. But this was different. This was a fight she could win. The searcher below had reached her previous position and was examining the disturbed ground where she'd been lying. Good tracker, but not good enough. He was looking for sign of her passage while missing the larger picture developing around him. The mountain lion was stalking him. Nora could see the cat moving through the underbrush 30 yards below the searcher, flowing like liquid shadow. Between the trees, the man had no idea he was being hunted by something far more dangerous than the woman he was tracking. She had a choice: warn him or let nature take its course. The man was part of a group that had murdered Samuel, planned to kill her, and showed no hesitation about shooting protected wildlife. He'd made his choices. The mountain lion made hers. The attack was swift, silent, and devastating. One moment, the searcher was examining boot prints in the snow. The next, he was down with 120 pounds of furious predator on his back. His scream echoed off the canyon walls before cutting off abruptly. The radio chatter from the remaining men exploded into panic. "Johnson's down. Something got Johnson." "What do you mean something got him?" "Cat! The damn cat got him!" Nora smiled grimly. The mountain lion had evened the odds and sent a message. This mountain had defenders that didn't follow human rules of engagement. But the cat's attack had also changed the dynamic below. The remaining men were no longer conducting a systematic search. They were in survival mode, bunched together for protection and looking for a way off the mountain. That made them predictable, and predictable enemies were vulnerable enemies. She moved through the rocks above them, using the terrain to stay concealed while tracking their retreat toward the vehicles. They were abandoning their sample collection, focusing entirely on escape. But they'd made another mistake. They were following the easiest route down the mountain, the path that would take them directly through the natural bottleneck where the creek cut between two rock faces. Her grandfather had called places like that death traps for anyone who didn't understand the mountain's moods. The recent snow was melting as it fell, creating slick conditions on the rocks. The narrow passage funneled wind and amplified sound, making it impossible to hear approaching threats. Most importantly, it was where the wolf pack would be heading to investigate the gunshots and screams that had echoed through their territory. Nora reached the bottleneck before the fleeing men, positioning herself where she could observe without being seen. The wolves hadn't arrived yet, but she could hear them calling to each other through the falling snow. Pack coordination as they moved to investigate the disturbance in their domain. The 3 remaining men stumbled into the passage below, slipping on wet rocks and arguing about their next move. "We need to get out of here now!" "What about the samples the boss is expecting?" "The boss can collect his own damn samples." "I'm not dying for mineral rights." They were 20 feet below her position when the first wolf appeared at the far end of the passage. Then another, then the rest of the pack, 8 grey shapes emerging from the snow like something from a nightmare. The men froze, finally understanding that they'd walked into something beyond their control. The mountain was reclaiming its own, and they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. The wolves circled the trapped men with the patient intelligence of apex predators who understood they held all the advantages. Nora watched from above, finger on her rifle trigger, as the pack alpha, a massive grey male with scars across his muzzle, tested the air and studied the intruders. But it was what she found in Samuel's pack during those tense moments that changed everything. Hidden, In a sealed compartment she'd missed earlier was a federal badge and identification. Not the credentials of a retired geologist, but those of Special Agent Samuel Hartwell, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Environmental Crime Task Force. The man who'd sold her this property for $5 hadn't been a concerned citizen trying to protect the wilderness. He'd been a federal agent conducting a deep undercover investigation into environmental crimes and government corruption. And she was now his successor. The badge came with documents that made her hands shake as she read them. Samuel had been investigating the Denver Consortium for 3 years, documenting a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Mining companies, federal agencies, congressional representatives, and even Supreme Court justices, all connected by a web of illegal payments and environmental destruction, but the scope was larger than she'd imagined. The consortium wasn't just illegally mining protected federal land. They were systematically destroying evidence of climate change, suppressing research that threatened fossil fuel profits, and eliminating anyone who tried to expose their operations. Samuel's investigation had identified 47 suspicious deaths over the past 5 years. Environmental scientists, government whistleblowers, independent researchers, and federal agents who'd gotten too close to the truth. All killed in ways that appeared accidental but followed patterns that revealed professional assassination. The mountain lion appeared on the rocks above the trapped men, her golden coat dusted with snow. She'd circled around the wolf pack and now had a clear view of the humans who'd invaded her territory. The cubs were safe. Nora could see them following their mother at a careful distance, learning from her example. One of the men below made the mistake of reaching for his weapon. The wolf pack responded instantly, flowing forward like a gray tide. The alpha's growl echoed off the canyon walls, a sound that spoke of territories defended for thousands of years. But it was the radio transmission that froze Nora's blood. Team 3, report status. The voice was familiar, too familiar. She'd heard it before, during ranger meetings and federal briefings. Deputy Director Marcus Webb, her former supervisor at the National Park Service. One of the trapped men activated his radio with shaking hands. Base, we're pinned down by wildlife. Johnson is dead, and we need immediate extraction. Understood. Cleanup protocol is authorized. Use the thermal charges. Thermal charges. They were planning to burn the entire mountain to destroy the evidence and make it look like a natural wildfire. Everything, Samuel's research, the cabin, the wildlife, and her, would be reduced to ash and scattered memory. The federal badge in her hand suddenly felt heavy with responsibility. Samuel hadn't just been protecting mineral deposits or investigating financial crimes. He'd been trying to expose a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the government itself, including agencies she'd trusted with her career and her life. Deputy Director Webb had been her mentor for 5 years. He'd recommended her for promotions, supported her through David and Emma's deaths, and expressed sympathy when she'd resigned to deal with her grief, all while knowing that his organization was complicit in environmental destruction and murder. But Samuel's investigation revealed something that made perfect sense in hindsight. The Park Service controlled access to vast wilderness areas where illegal mining operations were conducted. Rangers like her had been unknowingly providing cover for criminal activities, their reports altered or buried to hide environmental damage. Every suspicious natural disaster she'd investigated, forest fires that started in unusual locations, wildlife die-offs with no apparent cause, water contamination in protected areas, had been connected to consortium activities. And officials like Webb had been ensuring that investigations led nowhere. The radio crackled again. Team 3, you have 15 minutes before thermal charges deploy. Clear the area immediately. 15 minutes, not enough time to escape on foot, especially with wolves blocking the passage below and a mountain lion watching from above. The consortium was prepared to sacrifice their own people to protect the larger operation. But they'd made one critical error in their calculations. They didn't know that Nora was now carrying federal credentials and had already established contact with Agent Reeves. The thermal charges that were supposed to destroy evidence would instead confirm everything Samuel had been trying to prove. She activated Samuel's radio equipment and contacted Agent Reeves on the emergency frequency. Agent Reeves, they're planning to burn the mountain. Thermal charges, 15 minutes. Copy that. Federal response is en route, but they won't reach you in time. I have Samuel's badge and identification. This is now a federal crime scene. Understood. You're now acting under federal authority. Do whatever's necessary to preserve the evidence and protect yourself. The authority in her voice surprised her. There are 3 suspects trapped by wildlife. Below my position. One of the coordination voices is Deputy Director Marcus Webb, National Park Service. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know about how high the corruption reached. Webb's been under surveillance for months, Agent Reeves finally said. We just couldn't prove his involvement. If you can record his communications, already on it. Below, the trapped men were becoming desperate. The wolf pack hadn't attacked, but they weren't backing down either. The Alpha was testing their resolve, looking for weakness or opportunity. One of the men was bleeding from a leg wound, probably from slipping on the wet rocks, and the scent was making the wolves more aggressive. The mountain lion and her cubs had moved to a position where they could observe both the wolves and the humans. The cat's behavior suggested she was learning, adapting her tactics based on what she saw. Nora made a decision that would have seemed impossible hours earlier. Using Samuel's emergency signaling equipment, she activated a beacon that would guide federal response teams directly to her location. But more importantly, she began documenting everything with the high-definition camera equipment Samuel had left for exactly this purpose. Base, this is Team 3. Wildlife situation is deteriorating. We need extraction now. Team 3, extraction is not possible. Thermal charges deploy in 10 minutes. Clear the area by any means necessary. The callousness in Webb's voice was startling. These men had followed his orders, risked their lives for his operation, and now he was abandoning them to die in a fire. That would cover up his crimes. One of the trapped men apparently reached the same conclusion. Base, are you seriously going to let us burn? Team 3, you knew the risks when you accepted this assignment. The mission takes priority. That was when the mountain lion made her move, not toward the humans, but toward the wolf pack. The big cat moved with purpose, positioning herself between the wolves and the bleeding man. For a moment, predator faced predators across the narrow passage. Then something extraordinary happened. The wolf alpha stepped aside. Nora had heard stories of such encounters from her grandfather, but she'd never believed them. In rare circumstances, when territories overlapped and threats were shared, predators could form temporary alliances. The mountain lion and wolf pack had both been disturbed by human activity. Both had young to protect, and both recognized a greater threat than territorial disputes. The consortium men were no longer dealing with random wildlife encounters. They were facing a coordinated response from predators who decided humans were the real problem. But the thermal charges were still coming, and 10 minutes wasn't enough time to escape on foot. Nora needed to find another way to survive what was coming and ensure that Samuel's evidence survived with her. The hidden radio equipment included an emergency transponder that could summon federal helicopter support, but activation would reveal her position to everyone monitoring federal frequencies, including Deputy Director Webb and his consortium allies. She looked down at the badge in her hands, then at the mountain lion watching her from across the canyon. 2 females protecting their territory, their young, their future. The choice was simple. She activated the transponder. The emergency transponder's activation sent ripples through multiple command centers across the western United States. Nora could hear the confusion in the radio chatter as federal agencies tried to coordinate responses, while consortium forces scrambled to contain what had become a rapidly deteriorating situation. Federal transponder activated in Sector 7. All units respond. Negative, all units maintain current positions. This is still a consortium operation. Override authority confirmed. FBI Environmental Crimes taking operational control. Agent Reeves's voice cut through the chaos with professional authority. All federal units, this is Agent Reeves, FBI Environmental Crimes. We have an active federal investigation in progress. Consortium forces are to withdraw immediately. But Deputy Director Webb wasn't backing down. Agent Reeves, this is Director Webb, National Park Service. Your jurisdiction is unclear in this matter. Park Service maintains operational authority on federal land. Director Webb, your authority is suspended pending investigation. Agent Hartwell's files have been reviewed by federal prosecutors. The silence that followed was telling. Webb knew he'd been exposed, and desperate people made dangerous decisions. Nora used the distraction to examine Samuel's emergency cache more thoroughly. The hidden weapons were just the beginning. He'd prepared for a siege. Communications equipment that could tap into military satellites, surveillance devices that could track movement for miles, and most importantly, detailed maps showing defensive positions throughout the mountain. But it was the final item that made her breath catch. A complete dossier on her own background, compiled with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. Samuel hadn't chosen her randomly. He'd selected her based on specific qualifications that went far beyond her ranger training. Military service before her Park Service career, including specialized training in mountain warfare and wilderness. Survival. Psychological profiles that identified her as someone who would fight to protect others, even at personal cost. Financial records showing she couldn't be bought, and personal history indicating she had nothing left to lose. Samuel had been recruiting her for this fight long before she knew it existed. The mountain lion appeared on the ridge across from her. Position, no longer hiding from the human activity below. The cat had moved her cubs to a secure location and was now actively participating in the defense of her territory. Her behavior had shifted from protective to predatory. She was hunting the humans who'd invaded her domain. Below, the consortium. Men were trying to climb out of the canyon while avoiding both the wolf pack and the increasingly aggressive weather. The snow was falling harder now, and the temperature was dropping fast. Mountain weather in October could turn deadly within hours, and these men were equipped for a quick operation, not extended survival. Base, this is Team 3. We're attempting to reach the vehicles, but the animals are coordinating their movements. This isn't normal wildlife behavior. Webb's response crackled with frustration. Team 3, animals don't coordinate. You're dealing with panic behavior, nothing more. But Nora could see what the men below were experiencing. The wolves had split into two groups, one blocking the main route toward the vehicles, while the other circled to cut off alternative escape paths. The mountain lion was positioned to drive the humans toward whichever wolf group was best positioned for an attack. It wasn't random predator behavior. It was tactical cooperation. Her radio equipment picked up a new transmission on a military frequency she shouldn't have been able to access. Thermal strike authorized. Target coordinates confirmed. Deploy in 7 minutes. 7 minutes until they burned the mountain to hide their crimes. But the federal transponder had done more than summon help. It had marked her position for anyone monitoring emergency frequencies, including whoever was coordinating the thermal strike. Agent Reeves' voice cut through the confusion. Nora, federal helicopters are en route, but they're 20 minutes out. You need to survive whatever's coming. The thermal charges. We're trying to stop them, but the authorization came from high enough to override most federal agencies. Someone wants this evidence destroyed badly enough to risk a major incident. Through her binoculars, Nora could see movement on the distant ridges. Military vehicles moving toward launch positions for whatever weapons they planned to use. The consortium had resources that went beyond corporate security. They had access to military assets, but Samuel's preparations had anticipated this level of response. The emergency cache included gear she hadn't noticed before: thermal protection suits, oxygen equipment, and underground shelter coordinates that would allow her to survive even a direct thermal strike. The mountain lion caught her attention with a soft chuff. The cat was looking toward the hidden cave system Samuel had mapped, as if she understood that survival meant going underground. The intelligence in those golden eyes was unmistakable. This predator had learned to read human intentions as clearly as she read the behavior of prey animals. Agent Reeves, I'm going to lose communication soon. Tell the federal response teams to look for the cave system on the eastern slope. Samuel mapped multiple entrances. Copy that. What about the consortium team trapped below? Nora looked down at the three men still trying to escape the canyon while avoiding the wolves. They'd followed orders to commit crimes, threatened her life, and shown no hesitation about destroying protected wildlife. But they were also being abandoned by their own commanders, left to die in a fire that would cover up their superiors' corruption. Their choice. I can't save people who won't save themselves. But even as she said it, she was moving toward a position where she could provide covering fire if they managed to break free of the wildlife. Not because they deserved rescue, but because letting them burn alive wouldn't bring back Samuel or the mountain lion cubs that might not survive what was coming. The radio crackled with final transmissions. Thermal strike in 3 minutes. All. Personnel clear the target zone. Federal units maintain distance. This is now a national security operation. Agent Reeves to all units. Document everything. We're witnessing the destruction of federal evidence to protect criminal conspiracy. Nora gathered Samuel's most critical files and sealed them in the waterproof containers he'd prepared for exactly this situation. The evidence would survive, even if she didn't, and Agent Reeves had enough information to continue the investigation. But survival was still possible. The cave system Samuel had mapped extended throughout the mountain with multiple entrances and underground water sources. If she could reach the main cavern, she could wait out the thermal strike and emerge when federal forces gained control of the area. The mountain lion was already moving toward the cave entrance. Her cubs following in a line behind her. The wolves had abandoned their positions around the trapped men and were also heading for high ground and shelter. The animals understood what was coming better than the humans who'd ordered it. Below, the consortium men had finally broken free of the canyon and were running toward their vehicles. Too late. They'd never reach safe distance in time. But there, desperation had given them strength, and they were moving faster than the weather and terrain should have allowed. 1 minute until thermal strike. Nora reached the cave entrance as the mountain lion and her cubs disappeared into the darkness ahead. The cave was larger than Samuel's maps had indicated, with passages leading deep into the mountain's heart. Airflow suggested multiple exits, and the sound of running water meant fresh supplies. But as she prepared to follow the cats into safety, she heard something that made her pause. A helicopter approaching fast from the north. Not the military aircraft preparing to destroy the mountain, but something smaller and more agile. Agent Reeves' voice crackled through static on her radio. Nora, we've got federal extraction coming. In hot, can you signal your position? She looked at the signal flare in Samuel's emergency kit, then at the cave entrance where safety waited. The helicopter could evacuate her and the evidence, but only if she remained exposed long enough for them to locate her position. The thermal charges would deploy in 30 seconds. Time for one last choice between survival and duty, between saving herself and completing Samuel's mission. She thought of David and Emma, of the mountain lion who'd trusted her enough to share territory, of the wilderness that would be destroyed if the consortium's crimes remained hidden. The choice made itself. She fired the signal flare into the snowy sky and stayed exposed on the mountainside. Samuel's evidence clutched against her chest as the thermal charges began their final countdown. The thermal charges struck the mountain with the force of controlled lightning, turning the world into fire and chaos. Nora threw herself behind. The rocky outcropping as superheated air swept across the slopes, incinerating everything in its path. The signal flare she'd fired was lost in the inferno, but she could hear the federal helicopter fighting to reach her position through the thermal updrafts and blinding smoke. Samuel's emergency shelter had been designed for exactly this contingency, a reinforced position that could protect someone from the consortium's most extreme responses. But even with thermal protection gear, the heat was overwhelming. The air itself burned her lungs despite the respirator, and the rocks around her glowed cherry red from the intense energy. Through the roar of flames and the helicopter's rotors, she heard something that made her heart soar. The distinctive cry of mountain lion cubs echoing from deep within the cave system. The cats had reached safety ahead of the thermal strike, and the underground passages were protecting them from the worst of the destruction above. But the helicopter was in trouble. The thermal charges had created a firestorm that made landing impossible, and the pilot was fighting just to maintain position in the chaotic air currents. Agent Reeves's voice crackled through the radio, barely audible above the chaos. "Nora, we can see your position but can't land. The thermal activity is too intense." She looked at Samuel's evidence containers, sealed and protected, but weighing too much for a helicopter extraction under these conditions. The pilot would have to choose between saving her and saving the evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. That's when she remembered Samuel's final contingency plan. The digital recorder she'd found in his equipment wasn't just documenting radio communications. It was transmitting everything in real time to secure federal servers. The most critical evidence was already beyond the consortium's reach, safely stored in systems they couldn't compromise. "Agent Reeves, the evidence is already uploaded. Focus on extraction." The helicopter dropped toward her position like a stone, the pilot using the thermal updrafts to control descent rather than fighting them. It was a maneuver that required exceptional skill and absolute trust in the aircraft's capabilities. But as the helicopter descended, movement in the smoke caught her attention. The three consortium men who'd been trapped in the canyon had somehow survived the initial thermal strike and were climbing toward her position. Their expensive gear was scorched and melting, but they were still armed and apparently determined to complete their mission even as the mountain burned around them. The lead man raised his weapon as the helicopter's landing skids touched the rocky ledge. He was planning to shoot down the federal aircraft and eliminate the evidence, along with everyone who'd seen it. Nora's ranger training took over. She rolled from behind the shelter, bringing Samuel's rifle to her shoulder in one smooth motion. The shot echoed across the burning mountainside, and the consortium leader pitched backward into the flames. But his companions were still climbing, and they had nothing left to lose. The helicopter couldn't take off with armed men shooting at it from close range, and the thermal activity was intensifying. They had seconds before the aircraft's position became untenable. That's when the mountain lion appeared. The great cat emerged from the cave system like an avenging spirit, her coat singed, but her eyes blazing with protective fury. She'd left her cubs in the deepest, safest part of the cave system and returned to defend the territory that had become her partnership with the human who'd respected her claim. The remaining consortium men turned to face this new threat. But they were exhausted, injured, and operating in an environment that belonged to the predator, not them. The mountain lion moved like liquid fire across the burning rocks, using the smoke and chaos to mask her approach. The first man never saw her coming. The second had time to scream before she reached him. "Go! Go! Go!" Agent Reeves shouted from the helicopter. Nora sprinted across the 20 feet of burning stone that separated her from the aircraft, diving through the open door as the pilot pulled up into the smoke-filled sky. Behind her, the mountain lion watched from the rocky ledge, her territory defended and her young protected. But as the helicopter climbed above the thermal destruction, Nora could see the true scope of what the consortium had done. The entire mountain was burning, thousands of acres of pristine wilderness destroyed to hide their crimes. Wildlife that had lived here for generations was fleeing or dying, and the ecosystem Samuel had fought to protect was being reduced to ash. "Agent Reeves," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "They burned it all, everything Samuel was trying to save." "Not everything," the agent replied, holding up a device that was still recording. "We documented the thermal strike, the radio communications authorizing it, and Deputy Director Webb's involvement. This is enough to bring down the entire operation." Through the helicopter's window, Nora could see the cave entrance where the mountain lion and her cubs were sheltering. The cats would survive. The underground system would protect them until the fires died down and they could reclaim their territory. But the mountain would never be the same, and neither would she. The Federal Command Center in Denver erupted into controlled chaos as Agent Reeves transmitted the evidence from the helicopter. Deputy Director Webb's voice could be heard on recorded communications, authorizing the thermal strike, coordinating with consortium forces, and ordering the elimination of federal witnesses. The conspiracy that Samuel Hartwell had died to expose was finally laid bare, but Webb wasn't finished. As the helicopter approached the federal landing zone, Nora could see military vehicles moving to intercept them. The corruption reached high, enough to compromise even the federal response, and Webb was using his remaining authority to prevent the evidence from reaching prosecutors. "Agent Reeves," the pilot's voice was tight with concern, "we've got military aircraft vectoring toward our position. Someone's trying to stop us from landing." Through the window, Nora could see F-16 fighters approaching from the east. The consortium's influence in the military was apparently stronger than anyone had suspected, and they were prepared to shoot down a federal helicopter to protect their operation. But Agent Reeves was already 3 steps ahead. "Pilot, alter course to Colorado Springs. Cheyenne Mountain has been briefed and is expecting us." NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command facility, was one of the few installations that couldn't be compromised by consortium influence. If they could reach it, the evidence would be protected by the most secure facility in North America. The helicopter banked sharply, using the mountainous terrain to mask their new heading. Behind them, the F-16s were closing fast, but they couldn't fire on a federal aircraft without creating an international incident, or so Nora hoped. The radio crackled with official-sounding authorizations. "Federal aircraft, you are ordered to land immediately. You are carrying stolen classified materials." "Negative," Agent Reeves responded. "This aircraft is carrying evidence of federal crimes and is proceeding to secure facilities under FBI authority." "Federal aircraft, you have 10 seconds to comply or we will be forced to take action." The mountain peaks around them offered some protection, but they were still minutes away from Cheyenne Mountain's defensive perimeter. The F-16s had clear shots whenever the helicopter emerged from cover. That's when salvation came from an unexpected source. "Military aircraft, this is NORAD command. You are ordered to stand down immediately. The federal helicopter is under our protection." "NORAD command, we have authorization from military aircraft. Your authorization has been revoked. Deputy Director Webb is under federal arrest. Stand down or face court-martial." The F-16s peeled away, their pilots apparently deciding that following Webb's orders wasn't worth risking their careers. The conspiracy was collapsing as word spread through federal agencies that the evidence against Webb and his consortium allies was overwhelming. As they approached Cheyenne Mountain, Nora could see the massive blast doors opening to receive them. The facility that had been built to protect America from nuclear attack was now protecting the evidence that would save America's wilderness from corporate destruction. But her thoughts were still on the mountain she'd left behind. The thermal strike had destroyed the cabin, the forest, and everything Samuel had built over years of careful preparation. The mountain lion and her cubs were alive, but their habitat was gone. "Agent Reeves," she said, as the helicopter settled. Onto the Cheyenne Mountain landing pad. What happens to the wildlife? The cats, the wolves, all the animals that lived there. The mountain will be designated a federal crime scene and closed to all activity while we investigate. That means no mining, no development, no human interference while the ecosystem recovers. How long? Years. Maybe decades. But wilderness has a way of healing itself if we give it the chance. As they walked through the blast doors into the most secure facility in North America, Nora felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Samuel had chosen her for this fight, and she'd succeeded in exposing the conspiracy, but success came with obligations. Agent Reeves, I want to be part of the prosecution team. I know this case better than anyone except Samuel, and I owe it to him to see it through. You realize this will take years. Webb and his consortium allies have resources and connections that won't give up easily. I've got nothing but time. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The mountain lion and her cubs were alive, somewhere in the cave systems, beneath the burned forest. They'd need protection during the years it would take for their habitat to recover. There's something else, she told Agent Reeves. I want to be appointed as the federal guardian for the crime scene. Someone needs to monitor the recovery, protect the wildlife, make sure the consortium doesn't try to finish what they started. The agent smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Samuel's final recommendation was that you be given federal authority to protect the mountain permanently. Consider it done. Through the reinforced windows of Cheyenne Mountain, Nora could see the smoke still rising from the burning forest. Somewhere beneath that devastation, a mountain lion was protecting her cubs and waiting for the world to heal. She'd be waiting, with them, for as long as it took. 6 months later, Nora stood on the ridge where she'd first watched the mountain lion defend her territory, looking down at a landscape that was slowly healing from the consortium's destruction. The snow had melted and returned twice since the thermal strike, and already she could see the first green shoots pushing through the blackened soil. The trials had been everything Agent Reeves had predicted, long, complex, and fought every step of the way, by lawyers representing some of the most powerful people in America. But Samuel's evidence had been thorough, and Nora's testimony had been devastating. Deputy Director Webb was serving 25 years in federal prison, along with 17 other government officials and 43 corporate executives. The Denver consortium had been dissolved, its assets seized to fund environmental restoration projects. The illegal mining operations throughout the western states had been shut down, and new federal legislation protected wilderness areas from the kind of exploitation Samuel had died fighting. But the victory that mattered most to Nora was much smaller and more personal. Flash of tawny gold between the recovering trees caught her attention, and she smiled as the mountain lion emerged into a clearing below. The cat had grown during the winter, her coat thick and healthy despite the challenges of raising cubs in a damaged ecosystem. Behind her, 3 young lions played in the spring grass, larger now, nearly ready to establish territories of their own. The mother lion looked up toward Nora's position and, after a moment's consideration, sat down in the clearing. It was as close to an invitation as a wild predator would ever offer a human. Nora made her way down the slope with the careful movements her grandfather had taught her decades ago. The mountain lion watched her approach without alarm, though. She positioned herself where she could protect her cubs, if necessary. The trust between them had been tested by fire and proven stronger than the forces that had tried to destroy them both. "Good morning, girl," Nora said softly, settling onto a fallen log about 20 feet from the cat. "How are your babies doing?" The mountain lion's response was a soft chuff that might have been acknowledgement or amusement. The cubs were clearly thriving, despite the harsh winter they'd endured underground. The cave system had provided everything they'd needed to survive, and now they were exploring the recovering landscape with the curiosity of young predators learning their domain. The federal designation of the mountain as a protected wilderness area had come with resources Nora hadn't expected. Research scientists, environmental restoration specialists, and wildlife biologists were working to understand how ecosystems recovered from major thermal damage. The mountain was becoming a laboratory for healing, and the mountain lion family was one of its most important test subjects. But for Nora, the scientific significance mattered less than the simple fact that life had found a way to continue. The cubs who'd been born in crisis were now healthy juveniles, with the intelligence and strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her radio crackled with a transmission from the new research station built where Samuel's cabin had once stood. "Guardian Blackwood, we're seeing movement in the northwestern sector. Looks like your wolf pack is returning." She smiled at the title, Federal Guardian of the Hartwell Wilderness Preserve. It had a nice ring to it, even if the paperwork was sometimes overwhelming. The position came with real authority to protect the land Samuel had died for, and the resources to ensure that protection was effective. Copy that, base. The wolves have been scouting for weeks. Spring means they're ready to reclaim their territory. Blah. Mountain Lion heard the radio transmission and turned her attention northward, where the distant howl of wolves echoed off the canyon walls. The predators were testing each other again, re-establishing the territorial boundaries that had been disrupted by the consortium's attack. But there was cooperation, too. Nora had observed the mountain lion and wolf pack working together during the harsh winter months, sharing information about food sources and threats. The thermal strike had forced them to adapt in ways that created new relationships between species that had traditionally competed. The research team was documenting these changes, but Nora understood them on a more personal level. Crisis had a way of revealing what truly mattered, and sometimes the most important alliances formed between the most unlikely partners. Her satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Agent Reeves. The investigation was expanding internationally, following consortium connections to mining operations in South America and Africa. The work Samuel had started was becoming a global effort to protect wilderness areas from corporate exploitation. But Nora's part in that larger fight was here, on this mountain, protecting the recovering ecosystem and the wildlife that had survived. The consortium's attempt to destroy them. It was where she belonged, where she could honor both Samuel's memory and her own need to find purpose after devastating loss. The mountain lion rose and stretched, her movements fluid and powerful. The cubs followed her example, and Nora could see they'd inherited their mother's intelligence and adaptability. They would thrive here, in the wilderness that was slowly healing around them. As the cat family moved deeper into the forest, the mother lion paused and looked back at Nora. For a moment, predator and guardian regarded each other across the space between species. Then the cat turned and followed her cubs into the shadows, leaving Nora alone with the recovering mountain and the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. The afternoon sun slanted through the pine trees, warming her face and highlighting the new growth that would eventually restore this landscape to its former beauty. It would take years, maybe decades, but wilderness had patience that humans often lacked. She thought of David and Emma, of Samuel Hartwell, and of all the others who'd sacrificed for the wild places that defined America's natural heritage. Their loss still hurt, but the pain had transformed into something else: purpose, protection, and the understanding that love could take many forms. Above her, a red-tailed hawk circled on thermal currents rising from the warming earth. Below, the mountain lion and her cubs were learning to hunt in their recovering territory. And somewhere in the distance, wolves called to each other across valleys that were slowly returning to life. The mountain endured, and so did she.